Hi, and welcome to our next installment of Bible Backgrounds to help you engage with Scripture, know it for yourself so that we can help our kids particularly understand it for themselves and start to live their whole life really understanding what Scripture is about. My name's Joe. This is Trea.
Hello.
Great to have you back. We're looking at Genesis chapter 6 to 10, Noah and the flood.
Very popular children's story.
Exactly right. And you may or may not be disappointed with us by the end of this.
Yeah.
As we help you maybe look at it in a way that's going to help the kids grasp the point of the story.
Yeah, and hopefully...
Not just the entertaining bits.
I hope for us that we don't go away with just like a fun narrative that we can be like, oh, two little animals marched onto a boat and a rainbow happened, where we actually don't teach the point of this story and help people understand why the story is in the Bible, which we'll talk about, but actually have like a truth to it, that it's not just a story about a man in a boat and some animals that we can put in our kids' nursery, but it goes far beyond that and actually has some beautiful parts to the story on who God is and what he's called us to. But we always have a big question, and we are still answering the same big question, which is, what does it mean to sin? Yeah. Which in this passage, there's a lot of sin.
There's so much going on. And that is helpful, because if we start with looking at what would the first hearers understand by this, why is it in there? And remember, it's written to people. It was written to people that aren't us, but it's written for us throughout history. So we help make sense of the passage if we think, what was it included to do? Yeah. So that's a good question, and that's where we can start. Are you happy for me to start?
Yes, jump in. So, we've got a lot to cover in this one.
We're going to keep moving fast. So remember, these first stories up till the end of chapter 11 are helping us understand that God created the world for his glory and our good, and we were disobedient to his best for us, so sin enters in. Sin is spreading, so it went from the first two people to the first family. Now it's spreading to all of humanity, which is not great. So we've been seeing these little episodes that are illustrating the story growing, which that's what connects them. So God wants to have a covenant with us. We've broken it. So he wanted to give us blessings and place and descendants. And now we're trying to do those things ourselves, put ourselves in the place of God, and we meet this guy, Noah. So the story slows down a bit all of a sudden. So we have lots of generations,
and then we have a bit of a moment.
And so we find ourselves in this time where people are rejecting God kind of wholesale. So the whole, so much to the point where God's like, I think I'm going to uncreate creation.
Yes.
So water particularly is both the agent, so the cause, and also the kind of symbol of uncreation. So God speaking, there's water. Flood comes, chaos comes, uncreation kind of happens. And so God's in this process of, I'm the creator, I can uncreate. I think that this isn't going right. But he finds this man, Noah, who walks with God, which is a beautiful
Noah
thing.
was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time.
Yep, and he walked faithfully with God, it says. Yeah. And so Noah's not perfect. He's not a human without sin.
Nope,
He's
does
still
not say that.
Just a person. And so God sees him, sees his heart, which is a theme from last week's content as well. The heart's important. Sees Noah, says, okay, I'm going to preserve him through this. I'm going to bring some creation preserved through this act of uncreation and so recreation, and then we'll kind of have a reset. Yep. So that's the kind of the point of the story. That's what it's trying to communicate, that the faithful will still have a relationship with God, but those who aren't are going to be in a lot of trouble. So it does then throw up a lot of other things that we probably get stuck on.
So we come back to the, kind of in creation, we start to get a bit historical, a bit factual, a bit...
Which is not bad, and it is.
Did the whole earth flood? Yeah. Did just a section flood? Which flood was it? Is there a boat just waiting somewhere? We just need to find one day. Were there unicorns on the Ark, Joe? Do we know? Is that why they don't exist now?
They didn't make the cut. Or the lions ate them while they were
I've read many books that have, just different stories about animals that might have been late to the boat.
Yes.
There's a lot of things.
Classic Far Side.
Could you just unpack for us some of the important and unimportant things that sometimes we get a bit stuck up on?
Yes. So remember, if you think all the way back to our very first session, hopefully you got to see that. When we come to
you can always watch it if you did it.
When we come to creation, we got to understand what the text is trying to do. It's not trying to do science. So let's just say Moses is the originator, and by the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, so some 5 centuries before Jesus is born, they're collecting together and maybe writing down, committing to paper a lot of the histories that have been passed down faithfully through generations. They're the ones entertaining this, and so they're not in a post-Enlightenment Western context going, I need to understand science and physics and how this works. They're telling a story that paints why God would have a relationship with humans and how humans then have a relationship back with this creator God. So when they're talking about floods, they're not doing archaeology, they're not doing geography. So that's where it gets kind of complex. It's narrative prose to help us understand who God is. And so we're really not answering the question, how on earth did the entire globe, the earth, flood? How high was it? Was this a cataclysmic event that literally covered every land mass? No. What we're saying is the world of the first hearers was covered in water, and the big reset happened. So, things like... we're filming this in Brisbane. That's where we are. Hopefully, if you're part of River Life, that's why you're getting this. So we would say, a couple of times Brisbane flooded, and we were worried that there was going to be another flood this past January. And the reality is Brisbane didn't entirely flood. Even the last time we had a big flood, it flooded where we live because we're right near the river. But like my parents-in-law, they live nowhere near the river. When we were cut off out where we were, for like a whole week we were cut off and stranded out there. My in-laws were going to the shops and going to the movies, and everything was fine because Brisbane flooded, but they didn't. So the point is not how much of the land was underwater. The point is that God was uncreating so he could recreate.
And as a child, I actually believed every time I saw a rainbow that it would never rain like that again. That's how wrong I was taught this story. I actually thought that every rainbow was a new promise of that storm won't happen again. This is how we can get this wrong. I really believed that it wouldn't flood again the way that it flooded back when I was a child. I'm so sorry, I just had to add that in there.
That's brilliant.
So that's to make sure that doesn't happen to our kids, that they don't have that distruth.
That's great. So the point is not the extent of the flood.
No.
The point is not... where was Mount Ararat and where was the mountain ranges that it landed on, because it's actually a mountain range. It's the mountains of. They're not the points we're trying. And so the search for the archaeological search for the Ark, the boat, not the Covenant, the Ark of the Covenant, that's Indiana Jones. That's not the point of this, and it's not trying to explain that. It's actually explaining God's relationship with sinful humanity. And so there's actually record of flood stories in most of the ancient narratives from that region. Whether they're the same or not is actually immaterial. Whether they're recalling their experience of the same thing or not, Genesis is using this as a historical event, which we take it to be a literal event. The magnitude of it's not clear on, and that's not the point. It's an authoritative version of something that happened in the ancient world that caused people to change how they interacted with God. He preserved his chosen people through that. And then we don't then get hung up on the chronology either, because then it's got all, how long did it take, and all these generations that came afterwards, and Noah's descendants, and then the table of nations in chapter 10. We don't get hung up on that because the Bible, again, is not trying to create a comprehensive, exhaustive family tree. It's painting the story of here's the generations that followed. So even like if you go to Matthew's Gospel and the story of Jesus, it's 3 lots of 14 that's crafted for a reason. It may or may not be every single generation, but it's painting the picture. And so it's a crafted, accurate for its purposes record of what God has done in history. And so we just need to be careful to understand that it is a text that is telling a story that is true and it's real, and these were real people, but it's not the exhaustive understanding of it that we might do in something that we were doing a research paper on in 2024.
And then sometimes we get a bit caught up on the 2x2 animals as well. Are they important to the story, as important as we think that they are?
They're important to the story because they're included in the story, but they're not necessarily the point of the story. I mean, it also says that you're supposed to bring 2 of the unclean and 7 of the clean creatures. And
Yeah.
it's like, well, that's complicated
Well,
because...
now we don't just have 2 of every kind.
and when did things
What did
get
they
decided?
eat? You know,
Exactly
what did they eat?
right.
How many extras were there on there?
It's actually quite kind of minimalist on the detail.
Yes, it's just a couple of verses.
Yeah,
which when we think about, there's not a lot of detail in there.
It just, there's 2 of every kind of creature. Notice that this is like the Genesis chapter 1 and 2 language.
Yeah.
There's all of these kinds of creatures, flying creatures and land creatures after their own kind. Like, it's using creation language because that's what it's painting the picture of, a recreation.
Yeah.
But it also does tell us that God cares enough about all of creation that the things that are yet as not impacted by sin, he's going to preserve.
And that's,
He does care.
That's where we really make the point that we want to make to our children. And so this is where the story, so we've got the flood, we've got the kind of the poetic nature or the literal nature of the story, where we have a nice story here, but really what we have is a person. We have Noah.
Yeah.
And our curriculum actually asks us, like, why did God choose to save Noah? It's a good question, and I think we see it written in there. There was a level at which Noah was actually faithful. Noah was following God. Noah was having that moment, like in our previous stories where God is saying, "Hey, where's your brother, Cain?" Noah was living life where he was actually communing with God. He was blameless before God, not sinless.
No, just blameless.
Just blameless.
Different.
Very different. And so we have this person here who God chooses to save and his family, and to kind of redo everything, recreate, as you've said. And I think that points us to Jesus.
It does. Yeah, I mean, totally. I mean, there's the single figure that causes salvation to come. So it's definitely a type, an allusion to the one who will come. And even in Jesus' ministry, there's conversations around Noah and things like that. And so it's obviously a part of people's understanding of salvation can come through a person. God's redemptive purposes can come through one person and one family line, which we get all the way then through the rest of the Old Testament conversation. There's lots about that we see Jesus in that. So,
And I think we can teach our children in this story that the redemptive and rescuing of Jesus comes through our faith. And so it's actually that Noah had faith in God, and we see God bring rescue. We see him actually do those things in Noah's life. And so this story is maybe a little bit less about a flood and a little more about a promise.
Correct.
It's the rainbow as we know it. That does not mean that it won't storm again. The rainbow that actually is God's promise that he will not destroy all creation like that again, but he one day does promise us that he will save us through Jesus. And so when we have this rainbow, we actually have 2 promises here. We have this Old Testament promise to Noah, but we also have the promise that we have of Jesus to redeem and rescue us.
It says this is the sign of the covenant that I make between you. For all future generations. This is there's a relationship that he's not going to destroy things. He's going to remember that he cares for us, that it's everlasting, this covenant between us and him. So it's beautiful.
And I think in that we can take our kids into a space where you can actually do a really great activity where you write things in white crayon on paper, and the children could write what God has spoken over them or what they know God will do for them, whether it's just taking the burden of their sin or whether that's he'll love them forever or that they will get to be with him in heaven. They can write that in white crayon and then you can paint over it in rainbow colors. And so what I love about the rainbow is that while in the Old Testament it takes us back to this flood story, it is a symbol of God's promise. It's a symbol that he loves his people, that he wants to be with us, he wants to redeem us. And so that if we can help children to in the future look at a rainbow and actually think back to that, God keeps his promises. God is a promise keeper. God is someone who makes a covenant with us and wants to be with us and redeem us. And so I want kids not to think about a flood when they see a rainbow, but think about God, our Redeemer, our Rescuer. And so if we can still use that as part of our story, it kind of ties our story back together to Jesus, but bring them into why did Noah get saved? Well, he followed God. He followed God, and this is another great opportunity to ask children if they want to put their life give their life over to God and follow Jesus and invite him into their hearts, because that is actually where his promise comes in. Yeah. And so we've got that opportunity again in this story as well. So we hope that helps you teach it. Was there anything you wanted to add, Joe?
Look, you can talk about this all day. And come find me for a cup of coffee and we can. Yeah. No, just be aware that it's another story that has got some unpleasant parts to it. Yes. And we shouldn't sugarcoat it, but also just to be sensitive to people understanding it. Because the reality is, there's no record of Noah going around and preaching to everyone to say that you should come join me in the ark and get saved.
Yeah, there is a couple of things that people say about the story that don't happen.
And there's stuff in the New Testament that maybe changes the conversation a little bit, but we don't have any record of that in the text of Genesis 6 through 9. We don't really have any evidence for people ridiculing Noah, saying that he was an idiot for building this big boat when it's not raining. There's no evidence that it had never rained before. Like, that's not what the story is trying to do. It's painting a picture, and God's preserving his people through this uncreation and recreation. That's really important. And God makes a covenant, again, reiterating he makes the covenant with us. We don't do it with him. As everyone on earth had walked away from him, as everyone's making fun of God and don't want to be in relationship with him, the one person who does, God makes a covenant with. So that's really important. And the other conversations, have them outside of kids' church. It's great to throw around the ideas of floods and things like that, but let's get to the text saying what it means and what it needs to say, and then the other conversations come after that.
Yeah, and get our kids taking home what's actually important from this story, what's going to affect their lives moving forward, and how they live a life that's faithful and following Jesus. So we hope that helps you, and we'll come back for next week for some more exciting...
Another interesting passage.
Very interesting passage.
Yeah. See you then.
Bye.